Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Urban Fest online. Very pleased to rejoin you after the talk I did half an hour ago. And I'm here now. My name's Ghislaine Boddington. I'm the creative director of Body Data Space Collective in London and a reader in digital immersion at the University of Greenwich. So, joining me is Josè Luis de Vicente. And I'm probably saying that not completely right for you, but I know you're known as JL. So we're going to be here together today. And you are in Barcelona, is that right?
Yeah, Ghislaine.
Yeah.
Welcome from the other side of the Mediterranean, a little bit to the west.
And here I am in Turin, actually. So yes, it's lovely to be talking with you. And JL, we're going to talk about new frontiers of art, science, and tech. And what we decided to share with our audience is actually, first of all, for each of us to do 5 minutes or so presentation, looking at some of the work of artists and projects who have been exploring these aspects of technology and AI. And then we're going to have a discussion together, a conversation to continue some discussions we've had about the future evolutions of what is going to happen, what is possible to happen between art and advanced machine learning, which is coming through very fast into the art world. So, and we've got a little bit of time for discussion, good time afterwards, but we also would very much like some questions in from online audience. So do pop your questions into the box for questions and into the chat, and we will keep an eye on them and bring some of them into our conversation later. And we do hope that some of you will put forward some ideas and some extra things to ask us. So, great. So, first of all, I must say where you're from. You are obviously in Barcelona, but you are the head curator of Sonar Plus D, which is an amazing big festival. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that first.
Well, Sonar actually is, I think, belonging to the first generation of big new media festivals in Europe. It's in its 29th year, so soon it will be reaching its 30th anniversary. And Sonar has been for many years a very important gathering space for creative communities in Europe, not only from the world of music, which is actually one of the main reasons for it is known for, but also, of course, everywhere from new media art to new emerging models where artists, entrepreneurs, and researchers collaborate together in initiatives and projects that, in a way, I think that overcome or in a way, break down the boundaries between these spaces, which, as you know very well, has been an important factor in our communities. And I think it was also, in a way, one of the reasons that we want to have this conversation for and what we wanted to discuss about, like what is exactly what artists are doing in this complicated mesh of a moment of radical technological impact with big social ramifications, with social and economic and political outcomes. And if artists are, as I believe, and I know you believe also, one specific kind of researcher, in which way the output of the research has an impact or establishes a dialogue with what is happening in other communities of researchers.
No, absolutely. And we are at quite a tipping point, actually, of the crossovers between this, between the art, science and technology sectors. It's, as you say, has a long history, and we're going to hit some of that today. But we can see that it's reached a kind of point in time where the integration and the convergence between them is really necessary. And it brings us back to, I think, quite a new important renaissance of thinking that we're going to have across the next couple of decades. But first of all, let me hand over to you to share with us some slides and some of your thoughts, and I'll follow on from that, and we'll come back to this conversation.
Thank you. Well, I thought it made obviously sense to, if we're going to talk about artists, to show some art and show the works of some artists. And I think it's very interesting the moment in which we find ourselves today, because beyond the specific impact of machine learning as one specific technology, beyond the mythos and the big kind of like almost historical resonance of a tipping point of a moment around this notion of artificial intelligence emerging, I think we find ourselves in a moment and in a time in history where at least two contemporary conditions are becoming more and more important. One would be the notion of algorithmic governance, to what extent we are more and more embedded into systems that establish different logics of decision-making that are very much, as we know, driven by data extraction, by data gathering and analysis, and by automatic algorithmic decision-making. And also what Benjamin Bratton, philosopher and architecture theorist, Benjamin Bratton calls the emergence of planetary scale computation. The idea that in a way, systems of decision-making, of information processing, the huge sensor architecture deployed in the world are becoming like an additional layer on top of not only the planet, but our societies and the way they operate. So in a moment of algorithmic governance under an emerging condition of planetary scale computation, what are artists good for, or how are they engaging with different realities of the world today? And I just want to highlight a few projects, not a lot of them, just to look at specific things. So if I can see my presentation on screen. There we go. I want to talk a little bit about new forms of visibility, and by this I mean how artists are helping us to develop new strategies to make some of the forces that have an impact in the world today, that actually are shaping our experience of the world, more evident and more obvious. This is a project by actually Barcelona-based, between Barcelona and Germany-based artist, Joanna Moll, that is called The Dating Brokers. And here she is looking at one specific piece of technology that is embedded in the life of millions of people and that operates in ways that we don't completely understand. She was looking specifically at the way dating apps work and how dating apps create huge structures of data. The dating app industry is actually controlled by very few companies, and to get people in contact with people so they may have the promise of a future possible romantic relationship, it takes a lot of computational power, a lot of data extraction, and this data extraction, the ways in which regular everyday lives are explored, has all kind of impacts, but we are normally not very aware of them because, as many other industries, this is a pretty opaque one. So in collaboration with German digital rights collective Tactical Tech, Joanna bought one huge data set of data brokering coming from dating sites. As you know, you can actually buy personal data coming from commercial services through data brokers in many ways, and allow us in this project just to look at what is exactly what the system is seeing, or how it is identifying people taking part in these architectures, these relational architectures, really, these social machines that are dating services. So just by giving us a peek at this, I think that artists are helping to let us understand spaces of our reality that the industries that are in a way monopolizing these levels of relationship do not necessarily may want us to discover. Another dimension that I'm interested in is in which way artists are also habilitating new forms of resistance to technological architectures. In many ways, when we are engaging with an algorithmic governance system, we have not been asked exactly for our consent to the ways in which it has an impact on us. And also, we may need to develop or to think about forms of challenging, forms of putting into discussion the decisions that these algorithmic governance systems are taking. This is the work of Joey Bulamini, founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, an MIT researcher from MIT Media Lab, who was one of the first people looking at racial bias in face detection systems. The clear reality that in many algorithmic decision systems based on facial recognition, not everybody would be identified in the same way, because as we know, machine learning systems are trained on data, and this data increasingly incorporates the kind of biases that we recognize. So we may see that under the appearance of objectiveness or of fairness of one automatic system that is taking decisions without looking at race parameters or gender parameters, people is being treated differently. So for instance, a black woman or an Asian man is not treated by the system in the same way as a white Anglo-Saxon man, just because the data set doesn't reflect the diversity of the world in the same way. The work of people like Joy, I think, has been really key and really essential to show how art and the artist communities are very important to produce a skepticism also, and to discuss some of the claims coming both from the commercial industry, but also from, in some cases, the research community as, objective truths that shouldn't or don't need to be discussed. And I think this role of playing the role of being a critical conscience is one of the big contributions of the artist community today. And of course, new forms or new ways of changing the world, new ways of looking at in which way can we use these tools to highlight, but also to resist and to counteract against the processes of algorithmic governance and planetary computation that may be actually having an impact on people's life that is not necessarily desirable. This is, for instance, the work of artist Trevor Paglen in collaboration with Kit Crawford, who spoke today at the event, one of the, as you know, major experts in machine learning in the world, who in this exhibition, Training Humans, look at the history of one very specific set of data that is used and has been used by different technological applications, by different industries throughout many years. It's specifically the ImageNet dataset, which categorizes people according to their facial traits, and having been trained by many people to add tags that produces or that projects categories or attributes to the facial identities of people, may end up having an impact in the way automatic systems are used to mediate between different people. In this project, Training Humans, I think the collaboration between a very important artist, Trevor Paglen, and a leading social researcher, Kate Crawford, gave a perfect example of how in the space between social innovation and creative artistic innovation, there is a possibility to extend and expand the possibilities and the readings of what the tech industry is doing. I think, for instance, their work putting away into discussion the way in which the ImageNet dataset for facial recognition had been created, open up an important space for discussion and of social impact on a wider scale. Of course, another key work of new forms of advocacy would be the work of forensic architecture. This research unit made up of artists, but also social scientists, anthropologists, lawyers, operating across many different fields, from investigative journalism to human rights violations, but operating within the space of art. As we know, the pioneering work of forensic architecture has been very influential in looking at the huge amounts of media from social media, YouTube videos, pictures uploaded in sites, to other forms of digital forensics to try to identify and establish the truth in spaces of conflict where the truth has always been mediated by power. The work of forensic architecture is fascinating and ever-reaching in impact in many multiple forms. And I think it's also one template for forms in which artists are today operating in the world, having an impact beyond the realm, beyond the limits of the space and the institutions of art. And finally, I wanted to talk about new forms of memory, in which way we're going to also need the strategies of data gathering and analysis, of algorithmic governance, to establish in which ways do you preserve the memory of the world on a broader scale and through which mechanisms. And I think this is something very transversal that is actually also creating new forms of collaboration between industry, researchers, humanists, and artists across different fields. This is a project that I really, really like, developed by researchers and artists at Google Creative Lab. It's Pattern Radio, and it's a huge data set of whale song recordings where machine learning has been used to extract patterns and to create an organization of how these thousands of recordings of the voices of species, which in many cases are under risk of extinction, become a new form of legacy, a very, very rich picture of dimensions of the world that we really only started paying attention to 5 decades ago or so, even less, and create like a collective portrait of this very specific form of legacy that should be preserved. And finally, I was very, very interested in this project by a foundation based in Madrid, the Factum Foundation, that is basically working in the field of digital preservation, digital conservation and reproduction to try to scan a full island of Venice to preserve all its architectural richness. Because as we know, Venice is going to be one of the areas in which cultural heritage is more and more important, that are going to suffer a very direct impact from sea level rise and the impacts of the planetary crisis that we're going under today for climate change and the biodiversity crisis. The work of Factum trying to imagine that maybe creating digital precise reproduction of the profiles of cultural legacy are going to be important in a series of coming decades, when adaptation to climate change is also going to mean trying to preserve and hold on things that are under very real and very direct risk of disappearing, gives another role and a very important role to practitioners and creators in the space between art, science, technology, and society today. That's what I wanted to throw on the table as a way of kickstarting the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fantastic input. And thank you for doing these sections actually for us that maybe we can re-refer to when we get into conversations. So I will move to my short slideshow, which I'm approaching more from a content and process point of view, looking a little bit at history and where I feel right through to future and where we're going. So I'm going to start, actually, with my area of telematics, telepresence, and a quote from Professor Roy Ascott from 1989, when he says, across the vast spread of telematic networks, and telematics was the phrase that was used for what we now call telepresence. So across the vast spread of telematic networks worldwide, already in 1989, the quantity of data processed and the density of information exchanged is incalculable. The ubiquity of efficacy of the telematic medium is not in doubt. But the question in human terms, from the point of view of culture and creativity, is what is the content? And I think that is, for me, really interesting at this point in time, because we have big data happening out there from all areas of life. And obviously, from the science sector, has been very important in this last 2 years across the COVID-19 and other medical scenarios and pandemic, but also some of the terrible scenarios that have happened worldwide with climate change too. And obviously, technology is enabling us to gather this data, and it's what to do with it. What is the content that we're going to make out of this? Then I'm actually going to go to talk about Stanza's work. Now, Stanza is an artist, a new media artist based in London. He's been working for a very long time with computers, computer science background, visual arts background, etc. And this piece is from 2002. And it's not an AI work. He would call it advanced machine learning or machine learning work. But I really like this approach to the content from the network. It's called Urban Generation, trying to imagine the world from everyone else's perspective, all at once. And here he's using real-time data from within the city, collecting images through surveillance cameras from cities all over the world, and he actually then modifies that within software, and the results are presented back to us online in feeds. And the machine learning is making patterns and making a visual artwork out of what we all see from all over the world in our different streets, our different areas, seeing the results of other people's lives, of other people's daily lives. He made a version of this, actually, for lockdown in the last May, June. And this is just using surveillance cameras in London. He was fascinated by the fact of having used multiple cameras for many years. Now, suddenly, there were cities with nothing much happening. And this one's called Day. This is from feeds from surveillance cameras in London. This one is nighttime. And this is actually the multiplicity of cameras that he was using, a patterning of streams to show us what a visualization, really, of the surveillance cameras of London during lockdown, day and night. Now, what is really clear about all these projects, ones that Josè has talked about, but also what we know many other advanced machine learning works that artists are working with technologists, often in collaboration with technologists and with scientists, it's quite clear they all have a complex back-end. Complex back-end, simple front-end is the kind of mantra that I've been taught as a digital art maker and producer and curator by a brilliant, well-known pioneer interactive artist called Masaki Fujihata. He's a Japanese artist, and he's come into many of my productions to help me and give advice, and he always goes around all of us going, complex back-end, but simple front-end. And that is where I feel that we've had some quite complicated scenarios to get through in relationship to big data, whether it's city data, whether it's scientific data, whether it's just technological data or biometric data. But often, the difficulty has been the transference of that into a simple visualization front end that is understandable by a much larger mass of people. And that's where some of the artists that Josè has shown have managed to do that, to get across whether it's been an issue or whether it's been a particular point or a set of information in a way that many more of us can understand. Here we are working, actually this is the Dome, sat in Montreal, has this wonderful dome venue, and I've been very lucky to work in there on large-scale immersion pieces. And this was a project called Collective Reality that we were doing in the Dome across one of the IX immersion symposiums at SAT in Montreal in 2017. But during that series of events, we did some workshops within the Dome using the software. It wasn't an AI software, it was actually a generative audiovisual software base, working on motion, looking at motion tracking. But we used it to actually do some training for VR software programmers in what is spatial and generative immersion. So here you can see this wonderful set of, mainly guys, of course, because the software side is still slightly too caught in that gender bias, but it's shifting, gradually it's shifting. But all of them working on VR, XR, AR projects, mainly working at keyboards, mainly not actually so aware of the use of the body within interactive space, within generative space, and within future, of course, machine learning environments, more and more advanced, whether it's public space or whether it's actually entertainment space like this. Here we taught them about how their bodies do shift, the coding, how the coding moves around them, the coding that they're doing actually moves around them in space and time when they become the participant themselves. And I think we have a lot further to go, again, on the complex back end and the understanding of the simple front end that needs to come out from these advanced machine learning projects for us all to participate and all to gain from this. Now, as most of you know, my work is pretty much entirely around the body. I'm the creative director of Body Data Space, a collective in London that focuses on body, data, and virtual physical space, and has done in various forms of collectives for around 30 years. And we've been looking, of course, at me, myself, and my data, and how that actually works into AI, and what's happening out there in public space, in biometric space, etc. Again, I'd like to place this into history. This is Donna Haraway, a collection of essays and writings by a number of people. It's called the Cyborg Manifesto, 1984. And this is an image which is in the front cover of that book. I'm not actually sure who made this image. It's something I've tried to find out a few times, but it's one that's influenced me very much so. It's a 1984 image of the body of the future, actually fully integrated with technology, and actually definitely with an artificial intelligence edge to it. This is physical intelligence, the body and mind intelligence linked to technological intelligence. And it shows how long this kind of thinking has been going on for the body. We know that this is actually involved in the robotics world too. This is one of the most advanced robotic Japanese androids who reads the news. And we're seeing more and more integration of AI patterning and thinking into a robotic world to actually coming through with what we still find difficult in society. It's still within the uncanny valley. The more advanced the robot is, slightly difficult for us to deal with as humans, but actually potentially part of our future lives very much in terms of care, domestic help, and here, reading the news. Hopefully not too many hostesses at different events. And again, one of the ongoing things we need to talk about is the evolution of AR into the world, where we have a second interface on top of our visual sight, which actually supplements and enhances us, and how that will work with possibly AI. Here, I haven't put a glass or headset interface, actually. I'm showing the ones that are still coming. They still have a way to go, but which are well on their way now. The cybernetic contact lens that will go into your eye in a kind of bionic lens way, bionic eye way, which will then be able to record video, which will be able to augment images over the real world, and with AI reinforcement would actually give you the information you needed linked to your location, where you were, or even what you asked for and need, and also medical diagnosis, very important in this, yeah. So I'm just going to wrap up with a set of thinking that I've often been talking about. These images are from Blade Runner 2049, and I'm going to credit that because probably I shouldn't be using them, but they are the only image I have which actually reflects the blended virtual physical body of the future that I've been working on for really 30 years now. And this, for me, links to what I believe is the data body, our data body, and how our data body should be tethered to our physical bodies. So this is my words, my data body will be tethered to my physical body in alliance with my own AI, an alliance with my own AI, bridging and enabling a cooperation and a conversation, creating a bond between my multi-selves. My data body is transportable across time and space. It will augment and represent me outwardly, anywhere and everywhere, through my avatars, my robots, my holograms. It will network and support me visibly. And actually, it will be part of a complex weave of digital identities that I have and processes that I need to happen around me in real time, in multiple spaces at the same time. And there, it can enable me to find the best outcomes for my personal needs in the world today. Now, that's an advanced view of a body AI link up. And there are many others that we know are actually not as positive as that. So how do we actually move towards the ethics of a more moral consciousness and positive link of our bodies with AI? And how can artists, technologists, and scientists work together to foresee that? So as we know, AI integration is creating quite a new ecosystem again, more than we've even had before. No one really even fully understands this yet. It's not fully built yet. And in a way, from big business right through to the most radical innovators and young pioneers, we're all learning new in this. It's a really new thinking. It's complex patterning between creative makers and creative users that we now need to enable. And that's exactly what this kind of situation, the Starts EU programme and involvement in festivals like this, where we hear lots of different speakers at Urban Fest, actually helps us to unravel those patterns and start to make some solutions forward. So I'll finish there. This is me and my Internet of Bodies work, and I will move back into the conversation that we're going to have between us. So I think we've got about 15 minutes, JL, to actually talk further. And I don't know, would you like to start off with something and I can follow through here? And I'll just have a drink of water while I'm just waiting.
Like a question for you, because I was curious about, like, as I know your body of work in the space of telepresence and in the relationship of the telepresence with the body. It seems that in a strange way, this field of practice that has a long history, has like at least almost 4 decades of practice, crossed a turning point in 2020 when bodies all over the world became distant, and the digital infrastructure allowed, in a way, for the very first time to kind of like transcend the limitations of distance and space, and allow for society to keep on working remotely to a certain extent. So in a way, a certain idea that presence was going to be replaced by telepresence became reality in a way. But then on the other hand, it was basically, if the quintessential image would be the Zoom screen with a collection of faces, you know, it is faces, not bodies, what became central in this space. So what was your, as you were going through it, how were you like personally reflecting on the transition of the society to a telepresence productive society, but also the way in which the body, which actually was a protagonist because we were in a pandemic, the body was in a way, and protecting the body was central in what was going on. But the body was also left behind, and in a way, it was supposed that what we're doing now, which is 2 talking heads, distance in space, would become the de facto mode to keep on society working and moving forward.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And it was, in a way, this kind of strange scenario where suddenly for my work, you're right, across 30 years, this horrendous scenario happened, which created a universal research group of actually everybody going through, you know, this instant, this is the only way that we can communicate, is through this virtual world of telepresence, where we are automatically pushed into a mediated scenario, which actually is a pretty performative scenario in the main. And we are just seeing being, like you said, shoulders and heads, yeah? And it's not full body telepresence, which is what my work's been about, has been about the whole body in telepresence and non-verbal communication, yeah. But I do think that the first 6 months was difficult, and I recognised that for everybody, it was difficult anyway. Lockdown, pandemic, the body, you're right, it was about the body for pandemic and illness, etc. But also people having to learn to face themselves and others on a daily basis. You're often in meetings when you're seeing other people's faces, but you're not seeing your own face all the time, and you're not seeing your own expressions, the way you're dealing with yourself within those scenarios. So I think we've all learned a lot about ourselves. And I think there's some very simple things like, I do say this actually in quite a few presentations, one of the things is to gesture up, yeah. Because we use a lot of gestures, but we use them at this lower part, you can't see now, around the waist. So actually, I've been inviting everyone, just get your gestures up. Here I am. Get your gestures. You saw me doing it a few times then. Yeah, there we are. That helps me a lot, even to do this.
This is great for us Mediterraneans because it gives us cultural advantage over northern people since we move our hands around all the time anyway.
Yeah. And gestural, you know, there's a lot of different theories out there, but non-verbal communication, as we know from the full body, even say you're in a business meeting, how someone's got their legs folded, whether someone's just sitting there with their arms folded, whether they're like this, you know, etc. And not just the arms and the body, but also our facial expressions, our tone of voice. We take a lot of our understanding and our knowledge from this, yeah. And we know, and you mentioned Joy Buolamwini and the whole facial recognition discussion that's been going on. Very good film, Coded Bias, that people should watch. Very well done. And what's interesting about her work, not only, of course, bringing through this incredible bias against her having different skin colours in relationship to facial recognition, but that she's actually linked up with scientists and mathematicians across America and elsewhere, people like Cathy O'Neill, weapons of math destruction, to be able to actually take that into your discussion area about advocacy, yeah, where they've ended up being able to discuss it at the highest level of US government and have had an effect in terms of having facial recognition cameras removed from various housing blocks and even shifts in some states in America now that are actually banning facial recognition technologies from use, yeah. And this is, I think, a fascinating output from technologists and thinkers working together, finding out these little holes there are in the system, bias holes, yeah, or deep bias layers that have been there from the beginning. And emotion recognition is the same issue. There's so much out there at the moment, this kind of there's mythologies, I guess, that create fears in society about actually how AI will will recognise emotions from our faces. But the base of the actual data that's being used is actually some very simple, I think 6 or 8 emotions from really quite a long time ago, a scientist called Ekman, who actually Kate Raworth talks about a lot in her book, and was mentioning this morning in her speech here, who actually we are basing all this emotions work on these ridiculous 8 faces that are slightly like kind of mime faces of upset, disgust, joy. So there, you mentioned it too, the baseline data that is in there is already quite deeply flawed and very limited to actually the data from all of us that use data, which, so most of the world, 1 billion people aren't even on the internet yet. So their data isn't in there. So they're not represented, in that data.
And I'm specifically interested in that, in the fact that, and I think this is reflected in the work of many people, the conversation around ethics, the conversation around the ethical impact on a societal level of technology deployment couldn't really have happened in the same way without the artist community. And the artist community, I think, was at the forefront on establishing that we should never take technological architectures for granted. We should never kind of accept that they operate, A, in our best interest, B, in the only possible way, as if there was no, the word technology, the way that it's used, sometimes hides underneath a certain totalitarian or even like homogeneous projection of a view, like things are this way and they couldn't be otherwise, which I think that one of the contributions of this community is making radical experiments and radical prototypes in alternative architectures. And this is only going to become, I think, increasingly important, specifically in an age where geopolitics is going to be very much, again, putting in the center technological power as one of its driving forces. And we're going to be seeing that in the deployment of automation. We're already seeing that in the geopolitical wars around machine learning between China and the US, and in the role that the European Union wants to, in one way or another, play in these new global scenarios. So I think it is specifically important that programs like START actually exist to highlight the necessity of keeping spaces for alternative visions, for kind of like establishing the idea that this is not the only way things could be, that actually there are other possible ways of living, like experimenting radical projection of different sorts of scenarios, and in keeping a space for this critical conscience to have a space for visibility, because the voice of the industry is very, very big and very, very, very loud.
It's very big, it's very loud, and it's not very transparent in what it's doing with our data. And that is to its advantage, of course, because there we have the prediction economy comes into place, where for them, for corporates, the best thing is to have as much behavioral and biometric information about us as possible in a very invisible way. This harvesting is happening in developed countries, and to use that for, preparing the next products and services that they will predict that we can be fed. And given. And governments too, around politics, etc. But it is wonderful, the STARTS programme, in actually bringing together this art, technology and science in a creative way to create processes and onwards. And I think maybe you'd agree, but it would seem to me that any project using big data of any kind, whether it's coming from the arts, culture, from cities, from science and other technology data and buying data, really should be put into groupings with artists and visualizers and people that can work with this patterning through advanced machine learning, to help us all understand what's happening out there, but also to find these holes and these issues and these problems and bring them right to the forefront through the culture sector voice, and then take that, as we've seen happen now, into the advocacy, like you mentioned, and through into, hopefully, changing regulations. The EU has got a good debate going on regulation around AI. There's still a long way to go. GDPR is the only thing at the moment, worldwide. And one can get very worried about the Chinese system for social crediting. But on the other hand, and I think this comes up in coded bias, actually, there are a number of experts that say the one thing that China is doing right is that they're just very honest about it. They're saying, we are taking this data, it's totally transparent, it's the government that takes it, whereas actually possibly for most other countries in the world, just as much data is being gathered about us every day, each of us as individuals. We just don't know it's happening, we don't know who's getting it, and we don't know where and who it's being sold to. From policing to governments and to corporates. In fact, it's probably been sold across the lot and scattered. We're kind of fragmented data cells all across these networks. So we do need the artists, you're right, to point these out. So now we've got a couple of minutes left. And that's gone very fast. I think we could talk for another hour or so here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I wanted to close on my side just also with an appeal to the artist community, not necessarily to the other rest of players. This year, if something has taken, in a way, the headlines of what was happening in the artist community and the way that it was impacting the world, was the emergence of new economic models like NFTs, that actually, again, put in the center, in a way, a vision of the art market as something that, in a way, created or established a space for artificial scarcity. And, of course, it's been a very difficult year for artists all over. Like, the pandemic has had all kind of implications in the collapse of the ways that they usually make a living. But I think it's very, very important, or at least to me, it's very, very important to highlight that artists are not just creators of sacred objects that are artificially made scarce and that actually gain huge valuations because they are projected with this, sacred kind of like quality, the aura that makes them into special objects, even if they are immaterial, like in the case of NFTs. Artists have a very direct impact on the world in dialogue and in communication, as I said, with researchers, with advocacy organizations, with activists, with scientists all throughout the space. And I think it's very, very important to me that we keep on preserving culture and the arts as this laboratory in which we rehearse other forms of living, in which we imagine radical reconfiguration of society in a moment where so many forces are pressuring it from here and another, and not just stick to selling immaterial, sacred pieces of art online for huge amounts of money. You know, it's like, and of course, the art market is one way of representing the art world, but there are many, many others, and it's important that they remain visible and vital.
No, I really agree with you. And I think that, yes, we need to be careful that the artists who are really working out there to actually bring forward world issues and advocate for different ways to change things, like around climate change, etc., and sustainability, aren't just lost in this debate from the really very much from the kind of fine art movement of the fine art market, of selling and making money, and it being used as a kind of investment procedure, which it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't really matter what the object is. It's just the money behind it and the NFT kind of ownership scenarios. So, but because there are so many artists and who have debated this NFT area too, and there's some very good debates on the web from artists around this. The sustainability issues within it, the issues like we're saying about just commercialization, etc., who are trying to work in different ways and trying to make more political points with their art. I think there's another area that is very important to talk about is artists starting to work with, and small businesses of all types actually, the data union system. So that actually where data is actually protected and where you can be honest with your customers and buyers that we're not going to misuse your data. We're not going to sell it on to the police or the government, but actually there's special systems for creating unions around data. There's quite a few examples out there now. And also federated learning, where actually we can deal with this decentralization in a way which is more sustainable. And we're seeing some rapid, actually, ideas and solutions coming forward. And I think we're going to see quite a lot, actually, in the next year or so, because, you know, that's one thing lockdown's done is given people some time to actually work on some quite complex ideas to actually deal with some of the issues that have been bothering them, particularly when we see a pandemic of this size affecting us globally, and our whole world is put at risk, So the artist's voice are very important. And I think we should just emphasize what we both believe, that alongside good scientists and scientific fact and good technologists who are creative thinkers in their own right, to push the boundaries of how we can actually reach a wider set of public and a wider set of people out there, including younger generations, with these messages and how those can actually feed through into governments and into policy making is really what we should be looking forward to in the next 10 years, So, great. Well, it's been really good to talk to you, and I think I'm going to Zoom you next week so that we can continue this discussion, because it's been very enjoyable.
My pleasure.
And so thank you very much, José Luis from Sonar D+. I've just got to do a little reminder to everybody that the next session is at 4:15, so we've got to go, and it will be about the City for Digital Rights, and it's led by Renata Avila. And also just to remind the online audience to help us keep the conversation going through social media channels. You've got your hashtags, I think, at the top, at the top of your screens, if you're watching online, hashtag #StartsUrbanFest, hashtag Nesta Italia, and hashtag #StartsEU. So thank you very much for watching, and do stay with us, and tomorrow too. Take care and see you soon, JL. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.